the moon or any celestial body, and that'll have to change because if you don't own something, property, you don't develop it.
The groundwork is being laid now, even as a result of the Challenger accident, for a whole new range of commercial space companies to arise.
As soon as the economic return is there, you will not be able to keep these people out of space. It is the greatest motivator, and it provides, in my opinion, the greatest good for the greatest number. But when does that happen? That's a good question.
New frontiers satisfies our need for adventure and challenge. But the goal of filling our pocketbooks is never far behind. It's been a generation since the space age began, and space has already become a multi-billion-dollar business. In this program, we'll look at the business of space, the costs, the benefits, and who pays. We'll look at new developments, at the struggle for a new bottom-line approach to space, at the entrepreneurs seeking to create unique products for what they hope will be huge new markets. But the cost of doing business in space, of escaping the clutches of Earth's gravity, are so enormous that so far only governments have been able to foot the bill. To date, space ventures have been bankrolled almost entirely by the taxpayer.
Space extravaganzas are instruments of national prestige, demonstrations of scientific and technical superiority. Returns are measured mainly in knowledge gained and in political payoff. Such programs and the government contracts they generate create jobs on Earth and nurture the aerospace industry. But there is no way they can yield a direct dollars and cents payoff or a near-term return on investment.
-1. Contact. Okay, Houston, the Falcon is on the plane at Hadley.
The Apollo program was not a commercial venture, and there is no commercial entity that either could afford it, nor would even take the risk for such a venture. But that frontier had to be crossed.
Telecommunications was the first kind of space business to pay off. To date, it remains the only real moneymaker.
There's only a few things we know about space, that it takes a lot of money, that there's a lot of risk involved, and that the payback is sometimes very, very long. But the communication satellite business has come with very short paybacks. It's noteworthy that the Telesat of Canada has been profitable since the very beginning. We believe that Telesat is one of the early pioneers in communication satellites, probably utilizes that technology better than any other region that we know of.
Communications satellites can bounce signals across continents and around the globe in a matter of seconds. They feed the international demand for TV, and the demand for TV, in turn, pays for the satellites. There is a large and growing market for telecommunications. There is product to sell. Many communication satellites are now privately owned, but they're launched on rockets whose development was paid for or subsidized by governments. It still takes the wealth of a nation to compete in the high-stakes game of satellite launching. But the United States and the Soviet Union no longer have a lock on launch services. A highly competitive international race is on for market share. Former astronaut and now space investment consultant, Walter Cunningham.
We are part of a world community. We are not a monopoly anymore. We don't control everybody that goes into space. The French with their Ariane rocket price their launch at about the same figure. The Russians will offer it to you at least 20% less. The Chinese will give you a real cut rate deal to travel into space on their rockets, and they will also insure the flight, which we can't do now. We have got to stay competitive in the world economy. We can only do that if we are pricing our launches at something close to what the rest of the world economy is.
There's a reason why rocket programs are still mostly bankrolled by governments. It's a risky business, and it's hard to convince commercial venture capitalists to put their dollars on the launch pad. Nevertheless, some private companies are now struggling to find a toehold in the world of private launch services, an undertaking fraught with technical and financial pitfalls. Space Services Incorporated is a Houston firm headed by former astronaut Deke Slayton. Slayton and Chairman David Hanna are a new breed of space entrepreneurs, trying to drum up support among investors to whom space is alien territory: cattle money, oil money, real estate money. They face three major problems: persuading venture capitalists to invest in their firm, developing the hardware, and finding a market niche not filled by government launch services.
Beyond what he needs, it fits into some other niche somewhere. Our purpose is to provide the small user a tailored capability to match his requirement.
Developing a new launcher isn't easy. Space Services' first rocket, the Percheron, blew up on the launch pad. The company was forced to switch to the Conestoga, a tested, off-the-shelf rocket which successfully completed a suborbital flight.
The gleaming white 37-foot-tall rocket is aimed toward space and is ready to go on its 10.5-minute suborbital test flight.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, all engines running.
Getting into the air was difficult enough, but it was only the first step. After the technical problems come the business problems. The Conestoga was ready for customers, but were the customers ready for the rocket?
Well, I think the obstacles up to this point have been primarily the growth of the marketplace. It just hasn't grown as fast as we'd anticipated. Our customers are generally startup companies, new people, and raising the financing has been the biggest problem that everybody's had in the industry up to this point.
This is where a new breed of deal maker steps in. Entrepreneurs like Mark Otterman and Brad Meslin act as go-betweens, trying to set up new partnerships that will open up space as a viable commercial proposition.
The Center for Space Policy.
After the Challenger tragedy, obviously access to space became much more limited. In fact, it still is quite limited. And many investors became far more skeptical about the merits of investing in new space companies with unproven technology or undefined markets.
For an engineer who has been working for 20 years in the space business and in that time has perhaps worked on 3 or 4 major projects, a life cycle of bringing an idea into a product, into being, a life cycle of 7 or 10 years is not unreasonable. But if you are in the venture capital business and you want to see a 50% return in 2 to 3 years, then immediately you have a fundamental mismatch between the expectations of the guy looking for capital and the guy who's looking to lend it. Our role with these people has been, in effect, to give them a more sympathetic ear than a venture capitalist would. So we've got plenty of issues to look at.
The Center for Space Policy, a Boston-based company, is helping to forge new links and alliances between struggling space companies and cautious investors. Companies with new ideas need to know how to chart the shoals of government programs, and they must find venture capitalists with the vision to commit to the long term.
To position yourself within that program.
They need to know the directions in which things are going, but given that it's fairly near term, that translates into particular programs or program areas.
the Congress has very strongly pushed automation and robotics as a technology driver in the construction phase of the program. Is there going to be the money to do it?
These deals demand a whole new way of thinking on the part of the people with the money. The risks are high, the benefits still speculative, and projects take a long time to pay off. Years, perhaps decades. Consultants like Brad Meslin have an interesting task, distinguishing bright new ideas that actually have a chance of flying from those that don't.
I think that the Center for Space Policy has probably seen more crazy, far-fetched proposals than probably any other, certainly any other consulting firm in the space industry. Many of them have to do with such exotic applications as mining of asteroids, for example, or one company was interested in developing a franchise for banks and lending institutions on the moon, which was a little far out, as you can imagine. We became involved with SpaceHab, and it's really a good case in point. When the founder, Robert Citron, a successful entrepreneur in a number of other businesses, came to us in late 1983 with an idea to transport passengers, tourists, into space in the cargo bay. We thought that idea was clearly before its time, still do, for a variety of technical, legal, and safety reasons, really. And we suggested that perhaps a more effective way of employing his idea would be in the form of a simple pressurized can that he could develop, design, and lease the space of to different users. The idea evolved and matured over the subsequent year or two, developed a variety of business plans, brought some other consultants on board, determined the level of support we could expect from NASA, raised some financing, and so forth. SpaceHab is now, in our view, I think, probably among the most likely commercial ventures to succeed in the next 5 years or so.
The builders of SpaceHab hope to carve out a new market providing basic services that up to now have been the domain of the government. The purpose? To provide facilities for making new products in zero gravity. Space Industries Incorporated of Houston is also moving into this market.
The business that we're in here at Space Industries is another aspect of that commercial space business. We're not selling communications. We're not selling spaceships that fly to space and back again, but we are selling real estate, if you will, or renting real estate that's in space that can provide to manufacturers or to governments very special circumstances in which to make new things. We, at the moment, are a company financed by private monies, as I said. We have no revenues that flow to us right now, here in the late 1980s. We are very hopeful. In fact, we are planning on revenues starting to flow to us from the very first day that first module is in orbit, earning revenues.
It takes only a few fiery minutes for a rocket to propel its cargo off the Earth, but big money rides on the success of the launch. Payloads are technically sophisticated and very expensive to build. They require years of painstaking preparation on the ground before being committed to space. Insurance is a way of spreading the risks. Without it, the deals are just that much more difficult to close.
I had a marine insurance background and was fully aware that ocean commerce depended greatly on insurance to insure the cargoes in transit across the oceans. And when we started to contemplate the launch of a communication satellite that had great commercial value, both for its revenue benefits and its capital cost, it occurred to me that those who would perform this kind of work should be interested in insuring their risks. So I called the chairman of the board of ComSat, and I must say I was a bit intimidated because he was a great man in American commerce at the time, and introduced myself and suggested that I thought I could insure their launches. Would they be interested? And they said, my God, we've never thought of that, but why don't you come over and talk to us about it? And that began my career in the space insurance business, and really from there on began the space insurance business in the United States.
The problem in the past with insurance and the risk assessment, I think, has been that as a result of riding a long string of successes in the launch business and satellite business, with very few failures of either the launch systems or the satellites, I think people became unrealistically overconfident, neglecting a true, realistic assessment of the risks, because we are in a risky business. Everything that we're involved with is complex. There are literally hundreds of thousands of things that can go wrong with a rocket or a satellite. And I think those risk assessments became unrealistically optimistic.
We have to get comfortable with the risk. We have to begin to feel that, yes, these people can do what they're setting out to do. Have faith in their qualifications, their experience, the nature of the technology that they're dealing with, that they're not pushing the state of the art so hard that they're taking undue technical risk. And when we achieve that level of comfort, then we feel prepared to underwrite the risk.
We have motion.
In 1984, two communication satellites, Westar and Palapa, are launched from the space shuttle. Their booster rockets fail, and they are stranded in useless orbits. Their owners out $180 million. The insurance companies pay the claims, but for the first time, they don't have to write off the loss. Instead, they finance a daring rescue mission.
Gardner now going after Westar.
It's an interesting story now, and I think we can look back on it with a bit of detachment, but at the time we were flabbergasted that we could lose two satellites from the same launch of the shuttle. These early thoughts turned to negotiations with NASA and the Hughes Aircraft Company, and we were able to convince the insurance companies of the West who had already lost $180 million on these satellites because they were declared a total loss. We were able to induce them to put up another $5 million for each satellite to pay for the cost of salvage. It was a milestone in commercial space arrangements, and we're happy to say that we have got the two satellites back on this Earth, and we have now sold Palapa B2, I'm happy to say, and have actually shown the underwriters who participated in the salvage a return on their investment of nearly 4 to 1.
Entire eras in human history have been defined in terms of materials: stone, bronze, iron. Space materials processing is in its infancy. The technologies needed to produce these new products are just now being developed. But lawyer Art Dula sees a multi-billion-dollar industry in the offing.
Materials processing in space offers perhaps the largest area of potential reward. Some estimates go as high as $100 billion per year. For example, the Soviet Union has estimated 50 billion rubles per year by the mid-1990s out of materials processing. Basically, we go to space to make things that can only be made in space, such as new semiconductors, new pharmaceuticals that could treat thousands or millions of people, new forms of matter that we can't make on the Earth due to gravity. SpaceHab, a Seattle company, is building a piece of equipment that fits in the shuttle just to do materials processing experiments. They'll probably be the first commercial outfit to make a profit. Some 15 companies are working on proprietary ways of growing crystals or making pharmaceuticals, supercooled glasses, or things we haven't even invented yet.
The materials processing industry generally has suffered from a lack of access to space, from a constraint on available flight time that has inhibited research results. You need a significant amount of time on orbit in order to obtain the kinds of research results that are necessary to move to full-scale development and eventually production of a commercial material. Some of the exceptions to the rule might be companies like McDonnell Douglas, who have been involved in pharmaceutical research and development in space, pharmaceutical processing. These are very large companies with those deep pockets that I mentioned that are capable of sustaining a research and development effort that may not reach commercial fruition for a number of years.
Roger, we were waiting for that.
Drugs, electronics, and crystals are good candidates for space processing because they combine low weight and volume with very high value, and they can be made in larger amounts or in purer form in zero gravity than on Earth.
I can't see the rear ones, but I know the front ones.
When we go back to the moon, it will be mainly for economic reasons. If it happens, it will probably happen much as these things have in the past. We have seen that economic development in space follows a particular pattern. The government establishes the beachhead, assuming the high risks and costs of providing the basic support structure needed to set up operations.
Hey, man, put your visor down. I was strolling on the moon one day in a merry, merry month.
The private sector follows, often slowly and cautiously, looking for ways to make their mark. And with a little luck and a lot of hard work, also make some money.
There is orange soil. It's all over. Orange. It's trench time. And market. Copy that.
I think NASA ought to be the forerunner in the exploration of space, but the commercial sector, on an international basis, must put their effort forward and their dollars and their resources forward in the development of space. And that will happen. But again, I say timing is so important.
Those companies that will be successful will generally be those in the near term that support the infrastructure of the space program, that provide needed facilities, hardware, support services, rather than those that use the infrastructure to produce some specific product or service. In other words, we're just at the beginning now of the commercial development, the industrial development of space, and it's still essential for us to put the facilities in place that will enable future users to benefit.
There are a lot of companies, entrepreneurs, would-be companies in this country, for example, who think they see the start of a market niche in providing launch services, or who think that someday in the future, if there's enough activity in low Earth orbit, there might be a role for them in shipping oxygen to various space station facilities. In the same way that government here on Earth doesn't build its own power stations, it goes to a local power utility and hooks onto their grid and pays them a light bill. These people say, hey, if there were a government laboratory doing space science with 30 people all the time in orbit, they wouldn't have to generate or ship their own oxygen. I'll be Orbital Oxygen Incorporated and deliver it to their fill port every week.
Making a profit in space takes more than technical support and money. It also takes laws. Laws to protect products, and even more important, to protect ideas.
When you go into space today, you do it for only one purpose, and that's research and development. We're talking patents, trade secrets. These new forms of intellectual property have to be protected under law. But the question is, which law? No one has determined yet whether the space station will be an international space station running under U.S. law, or it will be a multinational station running under the laws of many countries. And the answer to this question is absolutely critical to making a profit in space. Because if you run under German law or Canadian law rather than U.S. law, your legal rights with respect to patents and trademarks and copyrights and all forms of intellectual property are different. You have to understand what those laws are, and so far we frankly don't know which law will apply to the space station.
It takes money to make money. And nowhere is this more true than in space. Can we expect the government to go on footing the bill indefinitely? Do we even want it to?
As long as you're depending on government funding in a free economy, it's always subject to the political whims, electing people, what are the priorities today, and we can change them and we can influence them. The only way that we can get the long-term commitment in our kind of an economy is to have commercial, successful ventures in space. Because what drives our type of systems and our economies, and certainly one I agree with, is the economic return.
I'm thoughtful of the airways and the ocean routes of the world having been kept open over the years by commercial activity, that it's commerce that brings us people to people more than any other event on Earth, that we are sharing an environment together for peaceful commercial uses. We probably won't be able to deprive the military forces of the world from the utilization of space long term. That's my feeling. But we dare not let them up there by themselves. We should have a commercial human presence in space.
In this episode, we've seen that the profit motive is one of the strongest factors driving us into space. But we don't live by bread alone. We're also driven by the search for knowledge. The urge to understand the universe and our place in it is part of our nature. And space offers us a unique new vantage point, a new way of exploring. In the next episode, Exploring the Edge, we'll examine how being in space helps us to gain a better understanding of our Earth, our solar system, and beyond.
Discovery Houston, it looks like you're heading toward the right place.
We think so. And Dave, I believe we got a tally ho on it.
Roger that. That sounds pretty good, old Eagle Eyes up there.
Discovery now within 50 miles from CENTCOM and closing. And the KU band rendezvous radar is activated and has locked on to CENTCOM and is in the passive mode.
And now you're going to close on CENTCOM.
Roger that. We got a bunch of guys looking for it out the top window here.
Discovery has come around into attitude and is now about 331,000 feet from CENTCOM.
And we're cutting the corner on it now, by guys.
That you are. You might even have